Hey everybody, Cobra here. Today I wanted to discuss really what makes the best or perfect Linux distro. If you like the video, be sure to hit like, leave you a comment, subscribe to the channel for more videos. I'm going to be releasing new videos every Wednesday and Saturday, so make sure you see all the new stuff when it comes out. If you're newer to the Linux space, or maybe you're thinking about swapping over to Linux from either Windows or Mac, the first thing you have to decide on is what distro to use, or at least what to install first. You could always use a site like DistroWatch, use things like Google, different sites, they do like the top 10 best distros or whatever, even though they're pointless, things like that. Maybe you watched a YouTube video on a cool looking distro, but is it actually right for you? What things should you be thinking about when trying to find the perfect Linux distro? First thing that I would consider is the hardware that you're going to be installing the distro on. Maybe you just built you a brand new computer for gaming with all of the latest parts. It's important to think about this because if you try and install a really old kernel from like an LTS distro or something like that with some brand new parts, brand new, especially GPUs, they're probably not going to have the correct drivers in order to work right. For example, about a year and a half ago when I got my 7800 XT, I had to make sure that I was using at least kernel 6.5 or higher because the Mesa drivers for the card weren't in earlier kernels. The card didn't exist, so there was no driver for it. So I would make sure that the distro you are going to use will have a kernel out of the box, something that you can use. If you're using really old hardware, generally anything's going to work for you, but just make sure you take note of that. Next, I would think about your specific use case for that distro. Are you wanting an all-around distro? Something you can do a little bit of everything on? Are you wanting, one that's set up for gaming out of the box? You install the distro and it has everything there for you to game with. Maybe you want a do-it-yourself distro. Maybe you want one that's lightweight because the computer you're installing it on is 30 years old and it doesn't have a lot of resources. All of these are things that you need to be thinking about when trying to pick one. There are tons of different options out there and some really cool projects, for very specific use cases. It's important to think about all of these kind of things. Next, I would consider how often or what kind of updates do you want? Do you want something that is really fast paced and rolling, like Arch or one of the Arch based derivatives? Do you want something that's slower but very, very stable, like Ubuntu LTS, Linux Mint, Debian, OpenSUSE Leap, etc.? Maybe you want something that's in the middle, like OpenSUSE Tumbleweed or Fedora or Ubuntu non-LTS. There are many different, update cycles and everything, but seeing how often you update your system is an important thing to consider, because if you're very rarely going to be using it, having something that's rolling is probably not going to be the best bet, because if you install too many updates at once, there's a chance that it could break. Not necessarily, but there's a chance. So that's one thing that I would definitely take into consideration. Finally, I think the last thing that you really should think about and take into consideration is how easy out of the box do you want your setup to be? Most every distro nowadays will have a, GUI installer and things like that. There are some that don't, but for the most part they do. But there's others that on top of that, after you install, they'll give you a very curated experience, like some of the gaming distros. Like I mentioned, they'll have pre-installed applications, packages and everything ready to go for you so you can game right out of the box. Others might only give you a base and you have to choose what to install. Something like a Fedora or an OpenSUSE, they give you a base install and then you have to choose what all you want to install. Others, you have to build and compile everything from source code. Like it's very time consuming, but everything is going to run perfectly on your system. It's built exactly for your system, etc., etc. There are certain use cases for that. But it's all of these is kinds of things that you have to think about. The point in all of this is that there isn't a perfect distro for everybody. As you become more experienced in Linux, you realize that distro is really just more of a starting point. You can generally make one distro look like the other distro and handle relatively the same as well. For the most part, of course. There are many examples out there of people showing exactly that, taking Fedora and making it look like Ubuntu or something like that. It's very common to see things like that nowadays. Find what works for you. Find what works for your system. Just because somebody else uses a specific distro doesn't mean you have to use that one. What they're using their distro for might be something completely different than what you're wanting to use it for. Maybe your friend or said YouTuber or whatever is a big gamer, and you're not going to be playing any games. You're only going to be developing on or just browsing the internet. You aren't necessarily going to need all of the same things that they are. So it's definitely all things that you need to be thinking about to take into consideration. If that distro that somebody recommended or that you saw in a video looked really cool, go for it. Give it a try. A lot of it is going to be trial and error, but finding out what works for you from an ideological standpoint on Linux is where you will find the most success. Let me know down in the comments, what is your perfect distro if you're already on Linux? Why is it perfect for you? If you're not already on Linux, what are some that you're looking at, you're thinking about installing, and why? What kinds of use cases do you have? What kind of hardware do you have? Do all the YouTube stuff down below, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.